Level 1, the dreamer. You're 34 years old, sitting in an airport terminal, delayed 2 hours on a middle-seat flight you can't afford to upgrade. You're scrolling real estate listings you have no business scrolling. A private island in the Bahamas, 14 acres, powder sand, 2.1 million. You screenshot it. You don't know why. You've done this before? Dozens of times at dozens of airports for dozens of islands you'll never buy. It's a habit like biting your nails, a place to put your eyes when the world feels too small. You made your money the boring way. A software company you started in a garage and sold 11. Years too early for 8 figures. Because you were terrified it would go to 0 and you'd have nothing to show for it. You've spent every year since wondering if you sold the wrong dream. Now you're wondering if you can buy a different one. You close the laptop. You board the flight. You forget about it for 6 days. On the 7th day, you don't forget about it. You call a broker who specializes in private islands. He has a voice like he's selling you something bigger than land. He tells you there are maybe 2,000 privately owned islands on Earth. He tells you most of them are unlivable. No water, no power, no way in or out except by boat that only runs twice a week. He tells you the dream and the reality are two very different pieces of real estate. You tell him you want to see anyway. You fly to Nassau. A seaplane takes you the rest of the way. You land in water so clear you can see your own shadow on the sand 30 feet down. You step onto a beach that has never had a footprint on it, that wasn't already washed away by morning. The broker watches your face. He's seen this look before. It's the look of a man who has just found the thing he didn't know he was looking for. You wire the deposit that night from a hotel room, hands shaking slightly over a trackpad instead of a pen. You don't know why your hands are shaking. You've signed bigger checks than this, but those checks bought numbers on a screen. This one buys a piece of the actual Earth. That distinction sits somewhere in your chest you didn't know existed. Level 2, the owner on paper. The closing takes 4 months. You learn there is no such thing as simply buying an island. You learn about riparian rights and mineral rights and the specific Bahamian law that says the government retains rights to anything below the high water mark, which means technically you don't own your own beach at low tide. You learn there's a difference between freehold and leasehold islands, and that some private islands advertised online are actually 99-year leases from a government that can, in theory, change its mind. You hire an attorney who specializes in nothing but this. He tells you most people who buy islands never intended to. They meant to buy a house, then a bigger house. Then they found out you can't build the house they wanted on any parcel of mainland zoning would allow. And someone mentioned islands have no neighbors to complain and no zoning board to say no. He tells you this like a warning. You hear it like an invitation. You close on the island in October. You are, on paper, the sole owner of 14 acres surrounded on all sides by water. You fly out the following weekend expecting to feel like a king. You feel like a man standing on an empty beach holding a folder of paperwork. There is no house. There is no dock, not really. Just a rotted set of pylons from the last owner, who bought the island in 1987 and visited 4 times, before he died. There is no power. There is no water that isn't salt. There is nothing here but sand, scrub pine, and the sound of your own breathing, which suddenly seems very loud. You sit down on the beach. You realize you have just spent $2.1 million to buy silence. You are not sure yet if that was a genius decision or the worst one of your life. Level 3, the builder. You hire an architect who has built on islands before. He shows you renderings of a 6-bedroom, main house with a roofline shaped like a wave. You love it instantly. You learn that building on an island costs roughly 3 times what building on the mainland costs. And that number is optimistic. Every board, every bag of cement, every toilet has to arrive by barge. It's a hole that money falls into, and you get to decide how deep to dig it. You fly out every 3 weeks to check progress. The crew lives in temporary housing on the island's far side. Men who've done this work in Fiji, in the Grenadines, in places you've never heard of. You learn their names. You learn Miguel has 3 daughters back in Nassau he sees once a month. You learn Desmond lost half a finger to a table saw here 2 years ago on a different island, for a different rich man, and came back to work anyway because the pay is better than anything on land. A hurricane forms in September. Category 2, then 3. It's aimed directly at your dot on the map. The crew evacuates. You watch the satellite loop from your office on the mainland. Useless. 300 miles away. Refreshing a browser tab like it will change the forecast. The storm turns at the last hour and clips a different island 40 miles south. You exhale for the first time in 6 hours. You understand for the first time that you don't own this place the way you own a car. You are renting proximity to something that could erase your investment in an afternoon and never apologize for it. He tells you it will take 18 months and cost $9 million. Level 4, the resident. The house is finished. 6 bedrooms, a wave-shaped roof, solar panels angled toward a sun that doesn't answer to anyone. A desalination plant hums quietly in a shed painted to look like a boathouse. You move in for your first extended stay. 6 weeks, no set return date. You've told your team you're unreachable. You've never said that sentence in your adult life. The first 3 days are the best 3 days you can remember. You wake with the sun instead of an alarm. You swim before coffee. You read an entire novel in a hammock in one sitting, something you haven't done since you were 19. You call your sister and tell her you understand now. You finally understand what people mean when they say they found peace. She laughs and says she'll believe it when she sees it. Day 9, the generator that backs up your solar array fails at 2 a.m. You have no cell signal beyond the satellite. Phone bolted to the kitchen wall for emergencies. You call the mainland contractor. He can't get a boat out until the tide. Turns at 6 a.m. You sit in the dark for 4 hours, in a 9 million house, sweating, mosquitoes finding the one gap in the screen door. And you understand something the brochure never mentioned. Isolation is romantic until something breaks. Then isolation is just distance between you and help. Day 19, you run out of a prescription you didn't think to overstock. The nearest pharmacy is a 90-minute boat ride plus a 40-minute drive. You lose a day and a half to a $14 bottle of pills. You start keeping a list, taped inside a kitchen cabinet, of everything that has ever run out at the wrong time. The list gets longer than you expect. Paradise, it turns out, has a supply chain, and you are the entire supply chain. Level 5, the host. Word gets around, the way it always does among people with money. You didn't advertise the island. You didn't need to. A friend from business school asks if he can bring his family for a weekend. You say yes before you've thought it through. 6 people become 10. 10 becomes a standing invitation that never quite stops. You build a second guest house because the first one is never empty. You hire a full-time caretaker couple, Elena and Robert, who live on the island year-round and manage everything you can't manage from 300 miles away on the boat schedule. The grocery runs, the small emergencies that used to be your emergencies and now are theirs. You realize you didn't buy an island. You built a small, strange country, and you are its only citizen who doesn't actually live there full-time. The guests love it in a way that starts to feel less like friendship and more like access. A former colleague brings people you've never met without asking first. A cousin twice removed messages you out of nowhere, warm and familiar, ending with a question about maybe borrowing the island for her wedding. You say yes to some, you say no to others and feel the coldness that follows a no from people who assumed the island made you a different kind of yes. You start noticing who asks about you and who only asks about the water. Pressure in the guest bathroom. It's a short list either way. Level 6, the target. An environmental group files a complaint. Your desalination outflow, they claim, is disrupting a coral formation 400 yards offshore, one that isn't protected by law, but is beloved by local dive operators, who've been bringing tourists there for 20 years. You didn't know the coral existed. You certainly didn't build the plant to hurt it. None of that matters once the complaint becomes a local news story, then a regional one, then a single paragraph in a magazine. Piece about billionaires buying up the last untouched corners of the world. Your name listed 3rd among 6. You hire marine biologists. You retrofit the outflow system at a cost that makes your original attorney's eyebrows rise. You do it because it's the right thing to do and also because you understand now that owning something visible from a satellite means you are never entirely private, no matter how many acres of water surround you. A local fisherman, whose family worked these waters for 4 generations before you arrived, tells a reporter that men like you buy the ocean's front yard and call it your own backyard. It runs as a pull quote. You read it in an airport, the same kind of terminal where this all began, and something in it lodges under your ribs and stays there. You start locking the gate on the dock that used to stay open. For anyone passing by in trouble, you hate that you have to. You do it anyway. Level 7, the fortress. Your net worth has grown past the number. That requires you to think about it differently. Security consultants you never hired start reaching out on their own. The way certain professions can smell a certain kind of wealth from a distance. You ignore the first 3 emails. The 4th one includes a photograph of your own dock, taken from a boat that had no business being that close, with a note that simply says, "We noticed you don't have coverage on the south approach." You hire them. Cameras go up along the tree line. A retired Coast Guard officer moves into what was meant to be a pool house. Your island, built to be an escape from the version of your life that had rules and locks and people watching, now has more surveillance equipment than the office building you sold your company out of 11 years ago. Your kids, you have 2 now, born in the years since level 4, raised half on the mainland and half in this strange, guarded paradise. Grow up thinking motion sensor lights and a man named Frank who carries a radio are just what childhood looks like. Your oldest asks at 7, why Frank doesn't come to Thanksgiving with the rest of the family. You don't have a good answer. You realize you've built the very thing you left the mainland to escape, just with better weather. Level 8, the caretaker of something larger than himself. A storm finally does what the first one only threatened. Category 4, no turn at the last hour this time. You evacuate everyone 40 hours before landfall. Elena, Robert, your kids. The dive instructor who lives on site for the summer season. You watch the aftermath from a hotel room on the mainland. Through a single grainy drone feed a contractor risks, flying 2 days after the eye passes. Half the tree line is gone. The dock is matchsticks. The guest house roof is somewhere in the ocean, or in Cuba or nowhere at all. The main house stands barely, its wave-shaped roof line stripped of half its shingles like a scalp. The insurance adjuster tells you almost gently that rebuilding will take 14 months and cost more than the original construction. Because materials have gone up and because insurers on barrier, islands have started pricing risk like they expect this to happen. Every few years now, because it does. You stand in the wreckage 2 weeks later, in rubber boots next to Robert, who has worked this island longer than your own children have been alive. He doesn't say anything about the roof or the dock. He looks at the one palm tree still standing, somehow, dead center of what used to be the garden, and he says, she's still here. Though, he means the island. He's talking about it like it survived something, not like it's a pile of assets on a balance sheet. You realize Robert has understood something about this place for years that took you a hurricane to learn. You rebuild. Not identical. Smarter, lower. Further from the water's edge, with a design that bends instead of resists. It takes 16 months. You are there for most of it. Somewhere in those 16 months, you stop checking your phone for what's happening on the mainland and start checking the tide charts instead. Level 9, the man who finally stops counting. You're 61, your kids are grown. One lives in Denver and calls twice a week. One lives 40 minutes from the marina and comes out most weekends with a boyfriend you actually like. Elena retired 2 years ago. Her daughter, who grew up half summers on this island the same as your own kids did, runs the household now, and she runs it better than you ever could have. You spend most of your year here now, not because you're hiding from anything anymore. You tried that, back around level 6 and 7, and it made you smaller, not bigger. You spend most of your year here because somewhere, in the storms and the supply lists and the coral controversy, and the security lights you never wanted, this stopped being a purchase and became the only place on Earth that has watched you fail and rebuild in front of it, over and over, without once selling the story to anyone. You still get the requests. A magazine wants to photograph the recovered paradise for a feature on resilience. A developer offers you an amount for the island that would have made 34-year-old you weep with joy. An amount so large it briefly makes your hands shake, the way the original deposit did. You say no without needing to sleep on it, which surprises you more than it surprises anyone else. You walk the tree line most mornings now, the one that grew back thicker and lower after the storm, built by the island's own stubbornness rather than any architect's rendering. You know every route that broke through the new dock planks. You know which reef fish come close to shore during a full moon. You did not buy this knowledge. It cost you 19 years, 4 contractors, 1 hurricane, 1 lawsuit. And every dollar of the whole money falls into you worried about at level 3. Nobody warned you it would take this long to actually own the thing you paid for on day 1. Level 10, the man who let it go where it wanted to go. You're 68. You've decided what happens to the island when you're no longer the one walking the tree line. You could leave it to your kids. Denver doesn't want it, she said so plainly. Gently, over dinner. And you weren't hurt by it, because you understood exactly what she meant. The one who lives 40 minutes from the marina wants it. But you've watched what wanting something too early does to a person on this island, and you're not certain the wanting is really hers, or if it's just an inherited version of the thing that gripped you in that airport terminal at 34. So you do something the broker who sold it to you 34 years ago never would have predicted, and something you yourself wouldn't have believed at level 3, standing on empty sand with a folder of paperwork and no house. You place the island into a conservation trust with a narrow, permanent carve-out, one guest cottage forever, for whichever of your grandchildren wants to spend a summer learning what Robert once knew instinctively, and you had to learn the hard way. The rest of it, the reef, the tree line, the water that took your first dock and gave you back a better one, goes to the people who study it and the people who've fished around it for 5 generations. Longer than you've been alive. The local fisherman whose quote once lodged under your ribs is dead by now, but his grandson runs boat tours past the eastern point. You invite him to dinner once, the only time you ever have. You don't apologize. Because there's nothing left to apologize for by then. The coral is healthier than it was the year you bought the place. Verified, not just claimed. But you do thank him. He doesn't fully understand what for. Neither entirely do you. You stand on the beach the week the trust paperwork finalizes. 68 years old, hands finally still. The same clear water at your feet that you saw from 30 feet up in a seaplane, back when this was still just a screenshot on a delayed flight. You don't feel triumphant. You don't feel like a king. The way you thought you might, back at the very beginning. You feel like a man who spent 34 years slowly trading ownership for belonging, and only realized near the end that those were never the same transaction. The island was never going to be yours. You were for a while going to be its. That was always the better deal. You just needed 3 decades, 1 storm, and a folder full of paperwork to understand the terms. You did not become the man in the sports car, or the man behind the gate, or the man whose name only meant a number on a satellite photo. You became something the brochure never once mentioned as a possible outcome. You became someone who was worth trusting with something wild. The end.